All right, so PancakesCon, track 2. The next talk up is Cryptic Dependencies and Cryptic Crosswords from Maya Kaczorowski, who is not a first-time speaker. Maya is a product manager at GitHub in the software supply chain security. She was previously in security and privacy at Google, focused on container security and encryption at rest and encryption key management. Prior to Google, she was an engagement manager at McKinsey & Company, working in IT security for large enterprises. She completed her master's in mathematics, focusing on cryptography and game theory, and is bilingual in English and French. Outside of work, Maya is passionate about ice cream and making ice cream for friends at home, attending the Penn State Ice Cream short course in January 2014, and researching ice cream headaches. She also enjoys puzzling, running, and reading nonfiction. And for the talk, how do you determine your code's cryptic dependencies, and what should you do when a new vulnerability is discovered? And also, how do you solve cryptic crosswords? As more developers and companies rely on open source code that anyone can contribute to, these also open doors to a new vector of attack. There are increasing supply chain compromises which successfully sneak in new backdoor packages, use typo squatting, or even compromise build tooling and signing keys. We'll first cover common kinds of supply chain attacks and when they're likely to happen. For developers, we'll discuss what you can do to determine your cryptic dependencies and be notified of new security patches you should apply, including best practices to make this easier on your dev team. We'll also cover what you can do to contribute back, like how you should report vulnerabilities you discover in open source. Having a better handle on your dependencies, let's address cryptic crosswords. They're crosswords, but with every clue itself being a puzzle, one part literal and one part wordplay. These originated in the UK and are still gaining popularity in the US, with the New Yorker even bringing theirs back recently. We'll explain what a cryptic crossword is, the types of clues you'll encounter, and go through a few of your favorite examples. You'll come away with a better understanding of what you can do for supply chain security for your organization and a better way to flex your brain on a Sunday morning. So please welcome Maya to PancakesCon. Maya, over to you.
Hello, thank you. So as just introduced, we're going to talk about cryptic dependencies and cryptic crosswords. So hi, I'm Maya. I'm a product manager at GitHub. I work on software supply chain security, and I'm really passionate about both knowing what's in your supply chain and knowing what vulnerabilities you have and being able to address those, as well as cryptic crosswords. I think they're just such a fun activity and such a good way to spend time. So today we'll be covering both of those topics. First, cryptic dependencies in your software supply chain, and cryptic crosswords. For cryptic dependencies, we'll first talk about what a software supply chain is and what we mean by that phrase. We'll talk about common kinds of supply chain attacks, when they're likely to happen, and what we've already seen in the wild. And then for developers, we'll talk about what you can do to determine your dependencies and protect yourself from potential vulnerabilities, and also what to do if you discover that a vulnerability exists in an open source project. Once we have a better handle on dependencies, we'll turn to cryptic crosswords. If you're not familiar with these, we'll first explain what they are and why their clues are different from crosswords you might be familiar with. And we'll dive into the types of clues you will encounter, go through a few examples to illustrate. So let's get started with dependencies. A former coworker of mine, Dan, wrote this, and it's just so poignantly correct. When you pull in an external dependency, you don't know what you're actually getting. When you pip install, go get, or maven fetch, it's not really any better than plugging in a USB drive that you found on the sidewalk, right? And we all know that that's bad. We all know not to do that. But you still pull code from open source. And I don't want you to stop doing that. I just want you to do so securely and safely. So software supply chain, as an appetizer to our crossword discussion later, why are we calling these cryptic? Why is cryptic an apt introduction and description for the dependencies that you have? Well, the reality is that it's extremely common nowadays to not really actually know what's running in your environment. A large amount of code that a typical organization uses is from open source. I've heard estimates from anywhere from 80, 85, 95, 95, 99%, like all kinds of ratios for what's actually in your code base that comes from open source. And you don't actually necessarily know what that code includes. So for example, if you decide to pull in dependency A for your project, it's possible that A itself has other dependencies B and C, known as transitive dependencies, and you don't even know that you have dependencies B and C. And it's just not possible for you to verify all this code. It's impossible today, unfortunately. And so where we've landed is that you need to be able to get some information and manage some risk for the dependencies that you do have in your code and any potential vulnerabilities that those are introducing. So that's where the concept of a software supply chain comes into play. think about what a supply chain is to begin with. A supply chain is anything that you depend on to deliver your end product. So for a pharmaceutical company, it's the provenance and the verification of ingredients, that go into each drug to ensure high quality. For a chocolate bar that you might buy at the store, it's a list of ingredients that's on that package and some information about nutritional information and contents, maybe, which ingredients are organic, as well as, which facilities they were produced in, and if those came in contact with peanuts, for example. And so when you think about a software supply chain, it's the same idea. It's everything that goes into your software and where that comes from, who wrote it, when that code was contributed, how it's been reviewed for security issues or any known vulnerabilities that exist in that code, supported versions, license information, if applicable, everything. It's everything that you could need or want to know about the software that you're running to help you determine your risk profile. And so a software supply chain is really anything that goes into or affects your code from development through your CI/CD pipeline until it gets deployed into production. Now, when you're talking about dependencies, as I was alluding to earlier, what's scary about this isn't as much what you're developing internally, although hopefully you have controls in place to, say, prevent developers from pushing code from their bathtub, or you restricted who has super admin rights in your environment, or you have some controls around, password requirements, 2FA, whatever it happens to be. What's scary, though, is open source code that developers do pull in and where that comes from. Because although open source is easy for developers, it also means that it's easy for attackers. I don't want to scare you. I want you to keep using open source code. I want you to keep contributing to open source code. I just want you to do it thoughtfully from a security point of view. And so if you think about everything that your software depends on, all its dependencies, right? Software dependencies are pervasive. It's normal for your projects to use hundreds or even thousands of open source dependencies. If any one of these dependencies has a vulnerability, chances are that you have a vulnerability as well. Being able to leverage the work of thousands of open source developers means that thousands of strangers effectively have commit access to your production code. So an innocent mistake or a malicious attack to your supply chain affects you deeply. Okay, so what kinds of software supply chain vulnerabilities and attacks actually happen? You might have heard security attacks broken down into three kind of common components. Who the attacker is, say a script kiddie or a competitor, a nation state, how the attack is conducted, and what the attack is attempting to do. A supply chain attack in and of itself isn't usually the goal, right? It's usually a step towards something else. Just like any other kind of attack, attackers are probably going for something that they can monetize. So a botnet, cryptocurrency mining, those are common ways of getting money as an attacker nowadays. And what's terrifying about a software supply chain attack is that almost anyone can conduct such an attack. So rather than focusing on the who, we're going to focus on the how, what happens when, to infiltrate your supply chain, and the what the attack is attempting to get at. So there are a couple different methods to attack your supply chain. The first, inserting malicious code into a dependency. This could be a purposeful backdoor, known malware, or a known vulnerability, or even just introducing another dependency, which in and of itself might have a vulnerability or might have another issue. So this is directly affecting the code and the maintenance of that code. Compromising a build tool, to change what you can actually build and how things are built for your environment. What's interesting here is that this in and of itself could be another supply chain attack, right? I could compromise a build tool through a supply chain attack to then compromise other things using that build tool, which is kind of crazy when you start to think that meta aspect of it. Compromising signing keys. This is to make it seem like an unknown package came from a known trusted source. I mean, which one of you actually, verifies those signatures on those packages anyways? Account takeover of a maintainer. Somebody takes over a known good account or a known maintainer's account. A project takeover, especially of an abandoned project. And accidental issues like typo spotting to get users to accidentally pull in your project as a dependency when they mistype something or when they're testing something. And these have a few different aims. Spoiler alert, as I said earlier, as other attacks into security, the ultimate motivation is almost always money. So first, to introduce a backdoor to your environment. This might be targeted for users of only a particular operating system, for example, in a particular region or at a particular company, or it might just be a wide swath of attackers to see what they can get at. Introducing malware. This could be to collect in login information, for example, but the easiest way to make money, like I said, is cryptocurrency mining. So malware might just be there to abuse any extra compute and mine, the trendy currency of the day. Traditional botnets also are part of this category. And lastly, service disruption. This could be, for example, to take a service offline, right? If I, think about the security, we're always aiming for CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If I can affect availability of your software, that's also an attack on you and your environment. So let's dig into a couple of specific attacks that we've seen in the last couple of years. First, Event Stream. Event Stream is a widely used Node.js library available via NPM. And when I say widely used, we're talking about 2 million weekly downloads. So what happened? In the fall of 2018, a user, Right9Control, volunteered to take over Event Stream on GitHub. It's a widely used package, as I said, but also not really well supported. So the author welcomed the extra help and even gave the newcomer publishing rights. I want to emphasize that the author is not to blame here, because we should have better ways to support these developers and also verify trust of our ecosystem. The author actually wrote in a GitHub issue. He emailed me and he said he wanted to maintain the module, so I gave it to him. I don't get anything from maintaining this module, and I don't even use it anymore and haven't for years. Okay, then on September 9th, 2018, Right9Control added a new dependency to Event Stream, flat map stream. About a week later, on September 16th, they rewrote the code to no longer require that dependency and tried to actually remove that original dependency. The change was made in the code base, but it wasn't pushed through to where the library was hosted on NPM. And then on October 5th, another user, HugeGlass, added malware to flat map stream. So then transitively, anybody who was using Event Stream was using the flat map stream that had malware in it. This was discovered in late November 2019, 2018, meaning this dependency and malware was running for almost 2 months before it was discovered. Now, fortunately, this actually wasn't that bad. It was bad that we didn't find it sooner, but this was extremely targeted of an attack. The malware looked to see if the host was a developer for a particular type of cryptocurrency wallet, the Dash Copay wallet. If the host was, it then inserted additional code to be distributed to end users. This code in the end user package scanned the user deposits to see if they had Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash above a certain amount, and if so, captured passwords and sent those to a remote address to be able to then siphon off that money. The malware did make it into a handful of releases of that Dash Copay wallet. Now, the reason I love this example is that it took 2 months to find. People were trying to do the right thing. People were trying to be helpful. And it was so targeted, right? It targeted developers of a particular piece of software, right? This is the kind of thing that we didn't really think was possible, or at least I didn't really think was possible. Like, I kind of liken it to the to Stuxnet, right? Like, making something that targeted and that specific in this environment is crazy, and yet it's happening. We see it happening in the real world. Another attack, LeftPad. This also made quite the headline, so maybe you heard of this one. On March 11th, 2016, a developer who maintained a small library Kik on NPM was approached by Kik.com, which is the Canadian messaging app, and asked to change the name of their package. The developer refused, and they didn't want to pay, and Kik.com didn't want to pay the amount that the developer had suggested for handing that over, to hand over that name. A week later, on March 18th, Kik.com's lawyers went to NPM, and NPM agreed that this could create confusion and handed the Kik library name over to Kik.com. So just a few days later, on March 20th, the developer sent an angry email to NPM about this decision. He wrote, "I think I have the right of deleting all my stuff." And that's what he did, removing 273 of his packages. On March 22nd, that's exactly what millions of developers experienced when their packages would no longer run because they were missing a LeftPad library that the same developer had owned and deleted. Most people didn't even know they depended on this library at all. It's a tiny function that you could write yourself, 11 lines of code, to add characters to the beginning of a string, but so many other packages depended on it. And 2 hours later, NPM made the controversial decision to republish the deleted package. And I just want to point this out, this wasn't a malicious attacker, though the developer himself was mad, obviously. He didn't understand the impact that this would have. This is just to show how interconnected all of our software is and how few people know the dependencies that they truly depend on. Okay, another example for containers this time. In May of 2018, several malicious images were discovered on Docker Hub. Chromtag found 17 images with plain names as part of the registry Docker 123321, which contained malware. The Docker 123321 registry was created in May 2017, and malware was added in the summer of 2017. The community was actually pretty good at discovering these images and made complaints to Docker Hub in the fall of 2017. However, nothing actually happened, and the images stayed up, publishing newer and newer versions every couple months. Fortinet was able to link these images to a cryptocurrency mining botnet definitively in early May 2018, and within days, the images were probably removed from Docker Hub. Nonetheless, in that time period, the 17 images in the registry were downloaded over 5 million times. These images contain some malware for cryptocurrency, for mining cryptocurrency locally, in this case Monero, and sending it to a remote server. It's estimated that over $90,000 US of Monero was mined by these images in that time period. Given that this is basically a toy library where the attackers, whoever they were just depending on users testing out images by like pulling truly like a random name, like I'm just gonna type in 123 321 and see if I can test something, and accidentally downloading them. That's actually a lot of money. $90,000 for passive income. That's kind of a tech bro's dream, right? And so this just gives you an idea of, if anything, this attack gives other attackers an idea of how quickly their malware could be detected and how it would be handled, which is kind of terrifying. Okay, another example, Bootstrap SaaS. This is a Ruby gem, rather popular with tens of millions of downloads. In March 2019, a known good version of the package was unpublished from the Ruby gems repository. Shortly after, a new version was published. This seemed to be legitimate, with signing keys matching previous publications, a new version number, and I'll get into this in a second, but this actually suggests that maybe an attacker had compromised the signing keys. We're not super sure how this happened. However, this version didn't have a corresponding version published on GitHub. And as another developer quickly discovered on the same day, there was a suspicious piece of code in the new version. Within an hour, the package was taken down. So really good job here to the community of figuring this out and dealing with this so quickly. About a week later, the original maintainers published an updated package without the vulnerability, and things seemed to resume as normal. So in fact, that package that had suspicious code added to it had a backdoor. Bootstrap SaaS is typically used as part of the build step for front-end apps in Rails. And in this case, the backdoor was to detect if it was running in a prod environment. If it were, it would execute a particular cookie. The company Sneak suspects that around 1,600 projects imported this vulnerability, but the eventual impact is actually unknown. And there's lots and lots of other examples I can go into here, but for the sake of time, we'll stop there on the examples. Okay, so now that we have a better idea of what's actually happening in the wild, a lot, oh no, let's talk about what we can do as a developer. This is kind of boring advice, like flossing or washing your hands for 20 seconds, but you should really be doing it. First, figure out what your dependencies are. Now, that can be kind of hard. If you're running on GitHub, there's a feature called Dependency Graph that lets you see these things. If you're a developer of a package, explicitly declare dependencies. Consider using a lock file and keeping it updated. Next, and this is the step everyone is too lazy to do, but remove your unnecessary dependencies. You don't have to patch something that you don't have. This is the easiest way of being secure, having less stuff, right? Think of like no code, right? No code is secure because there is no code. So for example, in containers, you might use a scratch or minimal base image. Automate security updates. If you can, automatically pull in security fixes for your code. This is so important. And if you take one to-do away from this talk, it's this. White Source found in their latest State of Open Source Vulnerabilities report that 85% of open source vulnerabilities have a fix available at disclosure time. You just need to apply them. If your testing isn't good enough that you feel confident doing that, I would say improve your testing, but also just pay close attention to security advisory emails or alerts or Twitter or however you get your latest vulnerability information. And know that you can patch. Testing this out and making sure that you can actually patch quickly is a great quarantine activity. And lastly, verify if and where you can. If you're part of a large company, conduct your own audit. Publish the results in a way that's respectful to the maintainers. Run tools like npm audit to verify your packages before you pull them. Scan your code and packages for known vulnerabilities. And check the checksums of what you pull to verify that it's actually what you expected. So it's really boring advice, remove what you don't need and patch what you do have regularly. Patch, patch, patch. And if you're running on GitHub, there's two features I really want you to go turn on right now in your repos and your organizations. One is security alerts, which notifies you of vulnerabilities in your code dependencies. And the other one is automated security updates, which for a variety of different environments, including packages from Composer, Maven, NPM, NuGet, pip, and Ruby gems, will automatically generate a PR to move you to a fixed version. It does not merge the PR without you approving it, but it automatically generates the PR for you, sends you a notification, tries to keep you safe. So please, please, please go turn that functionality on. Now, if you do find a vulnerability, what should you do? Please disclose responsibly. That is, try to tell the maintainer first in private. Check the project's instructions, see if there's a contact email, message the maintainer on Twitter, ask a friend of a friend if they have a contact, whatever you can do. You can also check the project's security.md metadata file if they have one. If they have one, that should detail how to actually responsibly report a vulnerability that you have. And if you're a maintainer and you now have a vulnerability to deal with, you're going to want to communicate out what's going on as transparently as possible to your community. Consider creating a security advisory to disclose this information. If you've never done a release process before for a security vulnerability, read up how Kubernetes does it for inspiration. They have a very clear, transparent model. And if everything is rosy right now, please, please, please create and update your security metadata file so that in the future, if something does happen, a developer or a researcher knows how to contact you. So if you are a maintainer of a project and you need to create a security advisory, you can create a security advisory directly on GitHub. If your project is hosted on GitHub, if it's open source, and you don't have another CNA, another way of getting vulnerability numbers, GitHub is your issuer, so you can file for a CVE directly. And that then gets published as part of GitHub's advisory database, which is curated and aggregated with third-party sources, and it's fully open source. So that data, anybody can go access and see and use, not proprietary. Okay, I'm gonna take a sip of water, take a bite of your pancakes. And let's dive into cryptic crosswords. So I've been into puzzles for a really long time, and people usually think that I mean something like the New York Times crossword, which I am into and I like. But I usually mean something like puzzles in the MIT Mystery Hunt, which if you haven't heard of that is, crazy amounts of puzzles that you do in a weekend. You don't really know what's going on. You need to figure out what the puzzle even is before you can go solve it. And so cryptic crosswords kind of feels like they're halfway there. They're way harder than normal crosswords or Sudokus or whatever you like to do in the newspaper, but they're still widely accessible. They're really hard. I love to go to like a wine bar, sit there with my cryptic for 3 hours and only figure out half of it, and it's so rewarding. And it's stimulating and exhausting, and it's a great way to pass the time. So once I explain this to you, you're going to think I'm a sadist. But hopefully if you like puns and other kind of wordplay, you're going to love this kind of thing too. So I'm sure some of you have done crosswords before, but maybe you're here because you've never done a cryptic crossword before. Have you ever picked up a newspaper and, maybe somewhere in the Commonwealth, and you tried to do it and you just couldn't figure out why you couldn't get any of the clues? And often these are the kinds of crosswords, kind of like the one I have on the screen here, that just have a lot of extra black boxes. Not necessarily, but sometimes you have a lot more boxes than you expect. The grids may or may not be symmetrical. So you've probably seen a cryptic crossword before, but you just didn't realize that's what you're looking at. You'll find them everywhere in the UK, in some newspapers in Canada, and in the US in the Wall Street Journal, and as of recently, the New Yorker. So here's the grid for yesterday's cryptic puzzle at simplydailypuzzles.com. And in classic speaker fashion, I made these slides last night, so we're going to use examples directly from that puzzle today. So what is a cryptic crossword, and why is it hard for you to solve if you're normally good at crosswords? What's different? Well, a cryptic crossword is basically a normal crossword puzzle, but each individual clue in and of itself is its own puzzle, right? That sounds crazy and confusing, and it is, and that's what makes it fun to solve. A famous puzzle setter, Zed, said, a good cryptic clue contains 3 elements: a precise definition, a fair subsidiary indication, we'll get into what that means in a second, but we'll call that wordplay, and nothing else. There should be nothing else in the puzzle to confuse you. So when I say that each clue is its own puzzle, thankfully these generally follow some standard structure. Each clue will have a literal half, where the clue is about the meaning of the word, and a wordplay half, where the clue tells you how to modify words or letters to get the solution. The literal half is sometimes called a definition or a meaning. It's like a normal crossword clue. You are familiar with this part of it. The wordplay half is basically a rebus or a recipe, and it does something like, scramble these letters and insert this other letter and then read it backwards. There are standard patterns for what this means and how to apply them, and we'll get to that in a second. A few things worth calling out. First, it's standard that the literal and the wordplay are each at different ends of the clue. What I mean by that is that it could be literal first, then wordplay second, or wordplay first, then literal second, but you can't really have like wordplay in the middle of the literal or alternate words or anything like that. Second, unless it's a really obscure word or a really poorly written clue, you'll know that you have the right answer. If the wordplay gets you a real word that the literal part also corresponds to, you're done. You don't need to enter into the grid or anything to like check your answer against other letters. It checks itself. So cryptic clues check themselves. The reason we focus on the clues is that the grid works pretty much in the same way as a normal crossword, although like I said, there might be more black squares or might be a fun shape or whatever. And so since the literal portion is pretty standard and you solved puzzles like that before, let's jump into specifically the wordplay. That's the fun part. So let's start with a simple example. So you'll see what I mean. Here's a clue: Fliers, flapping arms, and we know that it's 6 letters long. Okay, I split it out for you into the wordplay section and a literal section. Let's assume these are correct. So we're looking for a 6-letter word meaning arms that I can somehow get to by using flyers flapping. It could be like my limb, like an arm. It could be like a weapon. If it's a weapon, maybe something like swords is 6 letters long. Okay, not sure. Well, in the wordplay section, what if I break it down for you further? Flapping is an indicator that we're probably dealing with an anagram clue. So now I'm thinking I need to anagram the word flyers, which works since it has 6 letters, into a new word for arms. And we find rifles. If I flap flyers, I get a word for arms. Since the wordplay literal and the wordplay and the literal match, we know that we found the answer. So now you're hopefully getting the idea of just how much of a mindfuck these clues are and why they're so much fun. Okay, so as I mentioned, wordplay has a couple of different standard patterns that clues will generally follow. There's not that many kinds. They still take some getting used to. Anagrams, additions, removals, reversals, hidden words, and homophones. And these types of clues are broken down in lots of different references, but I've based what I'm referring to here off of the book, The Times' How to Crack Cryptic Crosswords. If you're getting started, that's a great book. I'll link to it at the end. Let's go into each of these in a little bit more detail so you get the idea. An anagram. An anagram is when the wordplay clues a phrase that you're going to anagram to get a new word. That's what we just did with rifles earlier. For scattered rain in this country, scattered tells us to anagram a word. If we anagram the word rain, we get Iran, which is a 4-letter country. You'll be clued an anagram by some turn of phrase meaning scrambled or crazy or odd or incorrect. Lots and lots of different words can be used here. The puzzle setter is going to pick a word that sounds like it belongs in the phrase, so look for something confusing. I found that these are some of the most common types of clues and some of the easiest when you're just getting started, especially if you're given length of puzzle answers. See if there's a word or words that can have the right number of letters next to an indicator and try anagramming them. An addition is when a clue tells you to put several words together, including inserting a word or letter into another word. When I say letter, it's because things like love might mean the letter 0 as a letter O, referring to the score of 0 in tennis, or Roman numerals, or common abbreviations like R or D for Republican and Democrat. Wordplay for arrive, holding, container, to join together. Holding tells us this is an insertion clue. We take a word for arrive, which is come, and insert a word for container, which is been, to get combine, meaning to join together. It'll be indicated that this is an insertion clue with words like in, with, holding, etc. You can be told to add a word behind another word, for example. Some kinds of rebus wordplay like this, where you add a bunch of parts of words, is probably the other most common type of clue after anagrams in American cryptics. A removal tells you to cut off part of a word or phrase, often at the beginning or the end. You'll then be left with a new word. There actually weren't any examples of this in yesterday's puzzle, so here's another example. Remove end off of adorable. We take a word for adorable, cute, and take the end off of it to get a word meaning remove, cut. I really like this one because remove could have been the thing cluing the wordplay, but here it's actually the definition. So a great example of the author choosing words to extra confuse you. This will be indicated with off, remove, cut, short, almost, headless, or other words suggesting something isn't complete. A reversal tells you to flip a word, a part of a word, to get another word. Wordplay for ring up about one garden shrub tells you to look for a reversal because of up. We find a word for ring, call, and then insert a word for one, in this case letter I, and then you read it backwards and you get lilac. Note that this example didn't just use one kind of clue. Many will use many different kinds of clues together. Unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not sure, because this makes the puzzle harder. This will be indicated with something like in reverse, telling you to look backwards. Up is also a way of telling you that it's a reversal, because if it's a down clue, up is backwards. A hidden clue in wordplay is when you have another word hidden in a phrase. A common situation is that between two words, if you like remove the space, you'd find another word hidden in there. This is especially commonly used for proper nouns that you might be trying to hide in wordplay. A hidden clue can also tell you to look for individual letters that are hidden, or, for example, every other letter in a phrase, or as the first letter of every word. So wordplay here for pretense, some, woman, scorn. Some tells us we can look for some hidden words. We look for a word meaning portents in some of the letters of woman, scorn, and see omens, starting in woman here and ending in the first letter of scorn. Hidden clues will be indicated with in. Again, that's a tough one because in can indicate so many different things. Holding, or if you're looking at a particular pattern, things like oddly, first of, regularly, etc. And homophones. A homophone tells you to find another word that sounds like the words that you're given. There again wasn't a homophone clue in the cryptic that we were doing, so I took another example. Wordplay for discuss, location, and vision. Discuss here tells us this is a homophone clue. In this case, location is a place or a site, S-I-T-E, and that sounds like site, S-I-G-H-T, which is another word for vision. A homophone will be indicated with phrases like we hear or so to speak. This is personally one of the types of clues that I find the hardest because unless that indicator is obvious, I'm really, really good at missing these. I also find that these are less common, again, especially in American cryptics. We didn't cover clues where you switch letters within a word. These exist, but are pretty rare in American cryptics as well. Something to note about cryptics. Punctuation doesn't really matter. It's just there to mess with you. So the puzzle setter is trying to make something that sounds like a real phrase. Keeping in mind the principle that the wordplay and literal parts of the clue will be at opposite ends of the clue. When you take a new clue, try reading the clue and taking a pause between every pair of words and seeing if what you're reading makes sense. Then, once you think you have an idea of what the literal and wordplay parts are, ideally because something is hinting you towards a particular kind of wordplay, then you can solve the clue. Okay, so now that we have the basics down, let's do a couple of examples from the cryptic yesterday. Country people have time to make a declaration, 9 letters. Try to do this, and as I go along too, I'm going to hint you towards it. Okay, so we'll split this up. I'll tell you that to make a declaration here is the literal. So you're looking for a 9-letter word meaning to make a declaration. In the wordplay, we can actually split up country will have time into individual words. Country could be state, people could be men, and time is the letter T. And you put those together and you get statement. Okay, let's do another one. For slimmers, food almost tasteless initially and costing nothing. We know it's a hyphenated word with 3 letters, then 4 letters. And again, I'll tell you that for slimmers is the literal here. Okay, we can take food almost tasteless initially and take the first initials of food almost tasteless to get fat. Then a word for costing nothing is free. Add these together and we get fat free, which is for slimmers. And last one. I like this one in yesterday's puzzle because I learned a new word. And that's one of the reasons I like doing puzzles. Duck finding meal on lake, 4 letters. Once again, I'll give you the split and just tell you that duck here is a literal. So what are some meals? Well, there's lunch, dinner, breakfast. Okay, well, what about tea? Since cryptic crosswords originated in the UK, you'll find lots of British isms in crossword puzzles. Just be happy that this is about tea and not some, cricket reference that I don't know. And we'll take L for lake as that is a known abbreviation, for example, that might be used on maps. Add those together and we get teal, which is the word that I learned. It's a type of duck. In fact, I probably saw one in Golden Gate Park yesterday. Okay, so you've realized by now that clues can have multiple different types of wordplay, which makes this extra complicated and fun, but you don't need to solve these on your own. I use a lot of online tools to look up synonyms, anagram words, or help find words that match a particular pattern, but the best aid that you have is patience. And sometimes you find the answer and you just know it's the answer, and it takes you a while to figure out why and verify. And that's kind of part of it that's fun too. So there's a couple of extra twists that you can take to make cryptics even more complicated. First are double definitions. In this case, clues might have no wordplay at all, but two words that have the same meaning. So for example, in here, care for business, care for, and business are both concern. So the answer is just concern. A question mark at the end of the clue tells you there's something else going on here with the clue, or a bit of a stretch in wording. For example, queue to see a railway being repaired. A queue is a lineup, but to repair a railway, you also need to actually like line up the tracks. That's a bit of a stretch, hence the question mark. In some cases, though, a question mark also means that the entire clue is both wordplay and literal. I know that sounds crazy, like what? But that is possible, and that does happen. Lastly, the puzzle that you're doing, because remember, we're actually not just solving individual clues, we have a whole puzzle to solve, might have additional complications before you can enter answers. It'll tell you, for example, to anagram all of your answers, really, before entering them into the grid, or removing letters, or remove words in the clue. This makes it really hard when you don't know how long the answers that you're looking for actually are. Sometimes that actually means that you don't enter valid words into the grid, so extra complicated. So taking the examples that we've done the last couple minutes, we're well on our way with yesterday's crossword. Here's where we got to from yesterday's crossword. And now that you have a few letters going, you can see if you can figure out the rest. And I wanted to share some of my favorite examples. The first one here, brief run as of luck for shot takers. This puzzle didn't give the length of the word as there was other wordplay going on, but I'll just tell you it's 6 letters. For shot tells you that the word is shot, that is you scramble the word takers. And you get the word streak, which means both brief run, you know, like in your underwear, and as of luck, like a poker streak. What a good clue. So much going on, so well phrased. I really laughed at brief run because it's something I never would have associated, but so apt once you got it. The second clue here, curves for dad, he's with sister, 11 letters. A curve is a parenthesis. That's also a parent, he and sis put together. There are lots of others, and I really should be writing these down, but basically an amazing crossword clue just makes you realize that some wordplay that you never saw before, it makes you go, aha, it's a great feeling. Hopefully you'll enjoy doing them as much as I do. So to learn a bit more today about both your dependency management and your software supply chain and cryptic crosswords, I have a couple of links here. For supply chain compromises, there's a list on the CNCF Git repo of things that they've seen. Some of the features that I talked about that you should turn on in GitHub are security alerts and automated security updates. And if you have a security issue to report in your project, create a security advisory. And for cryptic crosswords, check out the book How to Crack Cryptic Crosswords by Tim Murray. That's what I learned from, and I love it. And there's a couple of easier puzzles on simplydailypuzzles.com and harder puzzles in the Wall Street Journal, as well as a great compendium, Cryptic All-Stars. All right, and we have some time for questions, I believe.
Absolutely. So there was one specific question that showed up from a couple of folks earlier. They were a little confused as to how flapping indicates that the clue is an anagram.
Yeah, basically anagrams are kind of annoying clues. Anything that means crazy or changing or odd or incorrect or whatever. I was thinking of flapping as like flapping birds. It just means a bunch of things are moving. And there's a bit of a stretch, but they just are trying to say, yep, you're going to move a bunch of things around and anagram the word. And the author is always going to pick, the puzzle setter is always going to pick a word that seems like it makes sense in the context that you're giving. So you would flap arms, but you wouldn't necessarily change arms or move arms or something like that. So they just pick this word because it fit with the context.
Okay, so just any kind of movement or jumbling or that kind of thing.
Correct. Crazy is the other one that is often pulled up. Anything around being mad or things like that is typically used as an anagram hint as well.
All right, fantastic. And just as a quick question, could I see that last slide again for the resources?
Oh yeah, sorry. I will just leave that up.
Right on.
There we go.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Hey, there we go. We've even got links to puzzles for us. Well, again, thank you very much for spending the time, taking the time to educate us on these fascinating topics. Dependency management is something close to my personal heart. And yeah, those cryptic crosswords look like a lot of fun, if very, very hard. So,
Check them out while we have time. Thank you.
fantastic. So we do have a few minutes to fill just real quickly before our next presenter comes on. Looks like our next presenter will be available momentarily as soon as I switch things over. This is PancakesCon Track 2. We've just been watching dependency management and cryptic crosswords, and I'll be bouncing the recording and setting up for our next talk here shortly. Thank you very much for attending.
I'm probably gonna have to do this demo live with Ava because I didn't get to edit the video. Oh, am I already talking to people?
You're live. Yeah, just
Cool.
bear with us 1 second. Bear with us 1 second when we get things flipped over.
All right. It's only like my face. Sorry, am I broadcasting to everyone?
You are broadcasting at this particular moment. That's fine. That's fine. We've got a few minutes to kill real quick, just so we can get lined up at the correct time to start. We'll just wait until quarter till before we officially start, just so that folks who are in fact using the schedule for, when they want to show up, will show up at the correct time. But yeah, so far it's been a very educational afternoon. All right, and just to fill a little dead air, PancakesCon has been absolutely wonderful so far. It is streaming not only here, but also on Twitch. The PancakesCon Slack channel has the links to that. We'll note also that videos are being recorded and may be available shortly. The PancakesCon Twitter will announce that when that happens, hopefully soon, because I never did get to see this morning's videos. It's all good though. We have just a few more minutes left here. About 4 more minutes till we start the next talk for track 2. We're very glad to have you here. And we're very glad to have CyberCC as our next presenter. I'm sorry, Cybering CC.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Definitely happy to have you. I'll just be giving a quick introduction when we do start in just about 3 minutes.
Sounds good.